The Canadian hip-hop scene was first established in the 1980s. Through a variety of factors, it developed much more slowly than Canada's popular rock music scene, and apart from a short-lived burst of mainstream popularity from 1989 to 1991, it remained largely an underground phenomenon until the early 2000s. Canada had hip-hop artists right from the early days of the scene. The first known Canadian rap single, Singing Fools the Bum Rap, was released in 1982. Toronto's CKLN-FM was also an early supporter of the genre, launching Canada's first hip-hop program, the Fantastic Voyage, in 1983. For the most part, however, the infrastructure simply wasn't there to get most artists' music to the record-buying public. Even if a Canadian hip-hop artist could get signed to a record label at all, it was very difficult for them to get widespread exposure. Even if their music videos were played on Much Music, many artists still couldn't get their records into stores or played on the radio. Although a few Canadian hip-hop artists did break through to mainstream success around 1990, and a few Canadian acts such as Maestro, Fresh Wheeze, Main Source and Dream Warriors even gained cult status recognition internationally from the underground hip-hop scene, through much of the following decade, Canadian hip-hop acts experienced a slowdown without any significant artists breaking through to the mainstream. Although many hip-hop musicians continued to record and tour, not one Canadian hip-hop song reached even the top 100 on a Canadian pop chart between 1992 and 1998. Beginning in 1998, however, a sequence of events spurred by the anthemic collaborative single Northern Touch finally brought hip-hop back into the mainstream of Canadian music. Canada's propensity to create quality artists who rarely achieved public recognition prompted Allmusic to state that Canadian hip-hop is the best-kept secret in hip-hop. However, with the strong entrance of Drake, the Weeknd, Knowlin and the burgeoning success of Cardinal Offishall after the turn of the millennium, Canadian hip-hop artists have finally achieved worldwide mainstream international recognition. History Late 1980s, early 1990s, the rise of Canadian hip-hop artists such as Devon, Maestro, Fresh Wheeze and Dream Warriors did manage, for a brief time in the late 80s and early 90s, to break into the mainstream. In 1989, Maestro's first single, Let Your Backbone Slide, was the first Canadian hip-hop single to break the national top 40 and US Billboard charts. It remained the best-selling Canadian hip-hop single of all time until 2008. Other notable rap singles of this era include Maestro's Drop the Needle, Devon's Mr. Metro, Dream Warriors' My Definition of a Boombastic Jazz Style, and Wash Your Face in My Sink, Ground Control's Another Dope Jam, MCJ and Cool G's No Sex with My Sister, and So Listen, and Kish's I Rhyme the World in 80 Days. Mitchie May became, in 1988, the first Canadian rapper to sign a deal with an American record label. This action did not result in significant chart success for her. She has asserted in interviews that the reggae influences on her 1991 debut album Jamaican Funk Canadian style met with resistance from American label executives and radio programmers. The Get Loose crew released an independent mini-LP in March 1988 from their own record label East Park Productions with global distribution, thus becoming the first Canadian rap group with international record sales. The group featured the first recorded white rapper in Canada. The group disbanded in 1990, forming notable groups Just Me, Be Cool, and Self-Defense. In addition, DJs K-Cut and Sir Scratch of the Toronto, New York-based hip-hop group Main Source were Toronto natives. In 1991, Main Source released the hip-hop classic Breaking Atoms, which featured the debut of a young Nas before his rise in popularity. Rap also began to surface in Canadian mainstream pop in the early 1990s. Rapper Frankie Fudge performed a rap break in Celine Dion's 1990 single Unison, and appeared in her video. Female R&B duo Love and Saz performed rap in their 1991 single I Don't Need Your Kiss. Early to mid-1990s, follow years. In 1990, Milestone Radio applied to the CRTC for an urban music station in Toronto, which would have been the first such station in Canada, but that application was denied in favor of a country music station. which Toronto already had on its radio dial. The decision was controversial, and hurt the Canadian hip-hop scene considerably. Hip-hop and R&B fans in Toronto relied on Buffalo, New York's WBLK, an American station with no Canadian content responsibilities, while other Canadian cities often had no access to any urban music radio stations at all. After 1992, Mitchie May was the only Canadian rapper to make an appearance on the national pop charts until 1998 and even she didn't accomplish the feat with a hip-hop song, but by partnering with the alternative rock band Raggadeath for 1995's One Life. Soul Guy, a hip-hop promoter with Figure 4 Entertainment, said in 1999 that a special collaborative single, Can't Repress the Cause, was released under the name Dance Appeal to advocate for greater inclusion of hip-hop in the mainstream of Canadian music. Participating artists included Devon, Maestro Fresh Wheeze, Dream Warriors, Be Cool, Mitchie May, Lillian Allen, Area Fatchen, HDV, Dion, Thando Hyman, Carla Marshall, Messenger, Gillian Mendes, Lorraine Scott, Lorraine Sajato, Self-Defense, Leroy Sibbles, Zama and Thyron Lee White. Ottawa-based hip-hop group Organized Rhyme, which featured a young Tom Green before his rise to fame, had some success on Much Music with Check the Oar in 1993, but did not receive widespread radio airplay or reach the RPM charts. Maestro Fresh Wheeze, who moved to New York City in 1992 and attempted to break into the American market with the albums Maestro Zone and Now Era, This Kid Can't Be From Canada, found his career faltering in this era. Snow, who had a #1 Billboard's hit in 1993 with Informer, is sometimes mistakenly labeled a rapper, but in fact his style was more accurately described as dancehall, a style of reggae, than as hip-hop. Many American hip-hop artists were popular in Canada, and black Canadian musicians such as Infidels, Deborah Cox and the Philosopher Kings had notable successes in the R&B, pop and rock genres. However, even the most prominent Canadian hip-hop acts during this era, including Ghetto Concept, Rascals, Farm Fresh, TBTBT, Graffiti Logic and Hip Club Groove, struggled to gain any kind of commercial traction. Although Toronto market radio stations CHOG and CING-FM began to include some Canadian hip-hop songs in their contemporary hit radio formats, the hip-hop audience in the city remained loyal to WBLK, and for most artists the only venues available for reaching an audience anywhere outside of the Greater Toronto area were Campus Radio and Much Music's Rap City and X10 That began to change in 1996, when the Urban Music Association of Canada was formed to build the domestic and international profile of Canadian urban music. The following year, Dubmatic broke through as the first Quebec rap band to top Canada's francophone pop charts, and some controversy erupted in Toronto when Milestone was again passed over for an urban radio station on its second application. Instead, the CBC was awarded 99.1 to move its existing Radio 1 station, CBLA, from the AM band and, ominously, this was believed at the time to be the last available FM frequency in the city. The CRTC decision was not met with as much uproar as there had been in 1990, because the ruling was not seen as much of a shock. Indeed, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that the CBC would receive the frequency. The most notable Canadian hip-hop album during this era, Rap Essentials Volume 1, was a compilation which featured the debut singles of both Cardinal Official and Choclair. 1998, Northern Touch however, 1998 proved to be a transformative year in the development of Canadian hip-hop, as the Vancouver hip-hop band Rascals quite unexpectedly found themselves at the center of a sequence of events which gave Canadian hip-hop an unprecedented level of media attention, leading the Canadian music and broadcasting industries to make a number of structural changes which would ultimately give hip-hop musicians a more stable and commercially visible platform going into the 21st century. First, Rascals collaborated with emerging rappers Checkmate, Cardinal Official, Thrust and Choclair to record Northern Touch, a galvanizing statement of purpose for Canadian hip-hoppers which was released as a single in 1998 and which beat the odds to become the first Canadian hip-hop hit since 1991. Although the song just barely missed the national top 40 charts, peaking at number 41 in RPM, it reached the top 10 in most major markets, and was the first Canadian hip-hop song to reach the top 100 at all, and the first to garner widespread radio airplay both in Canada and internationally, since My Definition of a Boombastic Jazz Style. Later that year, Rascals won the Juno Award for Best Rap Recording for their 1997 album Cash Crop. Because of Canadian hip-hop's lack of commercial visibility, the award was presented during the non-televised portion of the ceremony, along with the technical awards, rather than at the televised main gala. The band had not yet arrived at the ceremony when the award was announced to Euro. When they did arrive, they were simply pulled aside and told that they had won the award. Alleging that racism was a factor in the award scheduling, the band refused to accept the award. Speaking to the press afterward, the group and their co-manager said that, for several weeks cultural critics and hip-hop musicians debated the issue in the press. Some suggested, in fact, that the Hip Hop Awards' lack of visibility could be seen as not just a result of Canadian hip-hop's poor commercial performance, but also a contributing factor. Maestro Fresh Wheeze, now known simply as Maestro, also broke his own hit jinx in 1998, with Stick to Your Vision buoyed, in part, by a Guess Who sample becoming his first top 40 hit in 7 years. Although he would not actually reach the top 40 until 2001's Bacardi's Slang, Cardinal Official also made his first appearance as a solo artist in RPM's Top 100 in 1998, peaking at number 91 with On Wit Da Show. Artists such as Chocolate, Jellystone and Socrates were also beginning to make waves in the press, as the year's more dramatic events renewed attention on Canadian hip-hop. As a result of the Rascals controversy, the Junos moved the Rap Award to the main ceremony the following year. It was won, inevitably enough, by Northern Touch. 2000s, The Breakthrough on June 18, 1999, the CBC's Toronto station completed its move to FM. Because the FM frequency offered better broadcast coverage of the region, the CBC found that it was able to surrender 2 FM repeater transmitters serving communities outside of the city, thus opening 2 new frequencies for license applications. In response, the federal cabinet issued an order in council to the CRTC directing it to give precedence to applications that took into account Toronto's cultural and racial diversity, effectively guaranteeing that Milestone would get a license in the new round of hearings. On June 16, 2000, the CRTC awarded one of the frequencies to Milestone, on the company's 3rd attempt. The other frequency was awarded to Aboriginal Voices for a station to serve First Nations communities. At the beginning of this same year, the Internet became home to Canada's largest rap hip-hop website publication and community, hiphopcanada.com. Also in 2000, the CBC created and aired Drop the Beat, a television series about hip-hop music and culture which was billed as one of the first such series in the world. The show starred Moen Mondesier and Mark Taylor as the hosts of a hip-hop show on a campus radio station. The cast also included Mitchie May, DJ Shaman and Cardinal Official. Finally, in 2001, CFXJ debuted as Canada's first urban music station. Urban stations quickly followed in several other Canadian cities, as well, and for the first time, Canadian hip-hop artists had a network of radio outlets for their music as well as numerous record labels committed to rectifying their past lack of interest in the genre. In the 2000s, numerous Canadian hip-hop artists, including Cardinal Official, Drake, Classified, KOs, Knan, Swollen Members, Sweatshop Union, Buck 65, Belly, Mocha Oni, Shad, Kyprios and Cadence Weapon, as well as many R&B artists, have emerged as mainstream stars. Cadence Weapon, in fact, was named Poet Laureate of Edmonton, Alberta in 2009. In addition to terrestrial radio, the national satellite radio networks CBC Radio 3 and Band Apart, which are both dedicated to Canadian independent music of any genre, also include numerous emerging hip-hop artists in their playlists. Band Apart has produced a compilation album of unsigned Quebec hip-hop artists, 93 Doors, which it distributed as a free download from its website. several prominent contemporary hip-hop artists, including Shad, Cadence Weapon, Knan, Sweatshop Union, Radio and Omnichrome, have in fact risen to prominence through these channels instead of through terrestrial radio. Apart from a few major stars, however, the hip-hop scene has faced continued struggle. Virtually all of the urban format radio stations which debuted in the early 2000s, including Flow 93.5, have since shifted from a pure urban format to a rhythmic contemporary format. While the stations still play some hip-hop, they now focus far more on artists who have already established crossover top 40 appeal, meaning that emerging artists can no longer rely on the stations to help them build their audience. In 2010, further, Milestone announced a deal to sell Flow 93.5 to Chum Radio, a division of the mainstream media conglomerate CTVGLOBEMEDIA. However, a new radio station, CKFG-FM, was licensed to Toronto in 2011 as a community radio station authorized to broadcast a broad spectrum of African and Caribbean musical genres, including hip-hop, reggae, soca and rhythm and blues. Canadian hip-hop musicians have also continued to face obstacles when attempting to break into the American and international markets. Music critics and journalists have sometimes attributed this to the perception, real or imagined, that stereotypes of Canada as a land of igloos and hoses get in the way of Canadian rappers being taken seriously. As early as 1994, noted Canadian hip-hop record producer Derek Brin was telling Billboard that Americans like something that sounds American. From here, it seems if you don't have that sound, you ain't it. It was not until 2008, when Cardinal Official reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart with a collaboration with established American star Akon, Dangerous, that a Canadian rapper had a major chart hit in the United States. He was shortly followed by Drake, whose 2009 single Best I Ever Had reached number 2 on the Hot 100, making it the most successful Canadian hip-hop single in the U.S. to date. Another major international breakthrough came in 2009 when a remixed version of Knan's single Wavin' Flag was announced as the official Coca-Cola theme song of the 2010 FIFA World Cup. The song has since become a chart hit in at least 16 countries worldwide. French-Canadian hip-hop, Montreal, being Canada's second-largest city and one of the world's largest French-speaking cities, has developed its own niche of French-language hip-hop, which later spread to Quebec City and throughout the province of Quebec. Although a few French rap singles broke through to mainstream success in the late 1980s and early 1990s, such as Les French Bees J'aime Savines, Cool Rock and J Trees MRF Ist Arriva Copyright, Le Boyfriend's Rapper Chic, and Our Copyright Track A Copyright Estes Quito Copyright. As in English Canada, this early success was not sustained, and francophone hip-hop remained largely an underground phenomenon until the emergence of Dubmatic, who became in 1997 the first francophone Canadian hip-hop group to have a number 1 hit on Canada's francophone top 40 charts. Dubmatic were followed by acts including Musean, Manu Militari, Ivan Kvack Copyright, Loco Locus, Cat Burglars, Attached Tachuk, Tactica, Sans Pression, Omnichrome, Anadaje, But I Know, Radio, A La Claire Ensemble and Triasiamitage. In 2005, the Dope Poet Society released a multilingual single and video entitled, All of Us off the album Pro Intel Pro, Promote Intelligence Program. Lead vocalist Professor Diaz raps in both English and French on the track, accompanied by a posse of 6 other rappers rhyming in a total of 5 different languages. The most internationally successful hip-hop musician from Quebec is Ghislaine Poirier, a producer whose own albums primarily feature francophone rappers from Quebec and France, but who is also now an influential remixer equally sought after by anglophone rappers and dance musicians from Canada and the United States. Roy Hienock, a rapper from Montreal, has become an internet phenomenon in France, and has performed in Paris 3 times since 2004. Aboriginal hip hop is also a prominent influence on contemporary First Nations and Ma copyright youth culture, spearheaded by artists such as Winnipeg's Most, Kenny Starr, War Party, Equal, Inez Jasper, Manic Wonderful, OS 12, Joey Stillis, Lil Pappy, Wolp Kainu, TKO, Samian, Crystal Lightning, A Tribe Called Red, JB the First Lady and Teen Ritz Official. Duke Redbird, a spoken word poet, has also been cited as an important influence on the genre despite his work not being directly in the genre itself. David Darkowin, a member of Tribal Wisdom, has hosted workshops across Canada encouraging Aboriginal youth to take up hip-hop as a method of creative expression and self-empowerment. Ainish created the first ever First Nations hip-hop festival. Subsequently, the event was held at Pasqua, Saskatchewan in 2004. The festival faltered for a number of years after that, but was re-established in 2013. The Aboriginal Voices radio network has also aired a weekly program, hosted by Plex, devoted to Aboriginal hip-hop. In 2009, Teen Ritz Official became the first Aboriginal hip-hop group with a song on the Rap City Top 10. The song Lonely went to number 1. In the same year, Manitoba's Native Communications radio network launched Streets FM, a hip-hop station in Winnipeg which was Canada's first radio station marketed primarily to Aboriginal youth. Besides music, hip-hop culture has had a major impact on urban Aboriginals in Canada in areas such as fashion, visual art, and so on. In 2013, the Vancouver Art Gallery toured the show Beat Nation, Art, Hip-Hop and Aboriginal Culture showing works by Aboriginal artists influenced by hip-hop themes. Influences. Although American East Coast hip-hop and West Coast hip-hop are major influences on Canadian artists in the genre, Canadian hip-hop also incorporates a number of other influences not commonly seen in the mainstream of the American genre. The Black Canadian community is much more dominated by people of Caribbean heritage than is the African American community in the United States, and as a result, Canadian hip-hop is significantly influenced by the rhythms and styles of Caribbean music. English Canadian hip-hop tends to be influenced by Jamaican, Trinidadian and Bahamian styles, while Francophone hip-hop from Quebec is commonly influenced by French Antillean, Dominican or Haitian music. Artists such as Michie May, Dream Warriors, Ghetto Concept, and Cardinal Official have incorporated dancehall or reggae into their music. Even those artists that do not use an obvious Caribbean sounds are often influenced by Caribbean English and themes. A famous example is the Cardinal Official song Bacardi's Slang, which gives examples of Toronto black youth slang many derived from Caribbean speech. As well, Rastafarian vocabulary, speaking of good as Zion, and evil as Babylon for example, is quite common, even if the rapper is not themselves a Rasta. The genre-hopping Tom Waits with a beatbox style of Buck 65, who integrates country, rock, folk and blues influences into his music, has also become a major influence on Canadian hip-hop in the 2000s. His influence is especially strong on hip-hop artists from the Maritime provinces, such as Classified, but can also be seen in artists such as Ridley Benton McEnroe. Electronic music is also a significant influence, notably seen in artists such as Cadence Weapon, No Luck Club, Tomission and His Lane Poirier, and jazz music has been incorporated since the early 1990s, particularly in the work of Dream Warriors, Social Deviants, Mood Rough and Our Grassroots. Artists such as Knan, KOs, Grand Analog, Touching NATO, Dragon Flea Empire, DL Incognito and Graph Nobel have pursued styles which blend a diverse mix of hip-hop, rock, jazz, world music, and R&B influences. See also: Music of Canada, Canadian music genres, Music of Canadian cultures. References. External links: hiphopcanada.com